Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the fourth chapter in the book of James. And the fourth chapter is really a logical extension of the third chapter, so we're going to review some of the foundational points that were made, which form the foundation of the fourth chapter. He analyzes and comments on the potential of power that the tongue wields, and also calls on he differentiates between carnal or worldly wisdom and true, authentic, divine wisdom. And we need both in order to prevent wars, because as we read in the opening of the fourth chapter, wars are really rooted in internal desires and things we need to discipline, which call for divine wisdom and the prudent exercise and cautious use of words and tongue, because words can escalate all the way up to wars, and we want to hold that in mind. Many of the wars, historical wars, origins can really be traced to heated rhetoric that escalated towards something beyond anyone's power to control without resorting to force. Where do fightings and strivings come from among you? Do they not come from your pleasure, that battle in your members? So he uses the analogy of battles to describe the various lusts and temptations and desires and appetites which compete for our attention in us. And when we feed the baser desires at the expense of the nobler desires and higher elements of our nature, they degenerate into violent outbursts and lustful ambitions, which are ultimately fed through through the exchange of violence. You desire and do not have. You murder and are jealous and are unable to obtain. You strive and fight, and you do not possess because you do not ask. So he's suggesting save yourself the trouble of going to war for the things you think you want, and focus on submitting to the will of the one who knows us perfectly, who will provide us with everything we need, because our desires are inherently evil if they are selfish. Now, we are organic creatures of biology, and as such, we do compete in a food chain, and yet it is possible to harmoniously coexist, though you never know it by looking at human history. But it could be possible had sin not disfigured the human race and distorted our pristine form of essence and corrupted us into violent creatures. And the entire geopolitical dynamic is almost invariably defined by war from start to finish in history. And all of this could be gone away through simple prayer. We do not have what we want because we do not ask. So everything we think we want, everything we truly need, we can just ask for. So that's what the main message of that verse is. You ask and you do not receive because you ask evilly in order to spend it on your pleasures. This proves the potential of selfishness for prayer. Now, our prayers are a reflection of our hearts, and they are rooted in our desires. So if we desire that which is evil, we have no right or reason to pray, if it be for something at the expense of any other, or if it's not meant for us to have. And that can provoke a rage against the one who is seemingly deprived or denied of their request, and a rage and enmity against Elohim, of which we're going to read in the fourth verse. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with Elohim? Whoever therefore intends to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of Elohim. Now, the sin of idolatry is frequently compared throughout the Old Testament to the sin of idolatry, and that's somewhat of a tongue twist because they're similarly sounded, but the essence is true throughout them. They are both a failure of faithfulness. We cheat or go outside of our marriages for carnal indulgences, and this is to be unfaithful to them, and the same is to be idolatry, which can be a host of things in all of its variety and components. There's a multitude of sins which fall under the umbrella of idolatry, and it's rooted in a faithlessness towards Elohim. So we have before us two options. We can be friendly with the world, we can be man pleasers, or we can we can please Elohim. And in order to obey Elohim, we must disobey ourselves. So we must discipline our desires and align them with his will, because his will, he knows us perfectly, he wants what's best for us, and is able to provide for that which we need. And we don't want to be an enemy. Who wants to be an enemy with the benevolent and almighty, omnipotent one to whom we must all answer in judgment, when strategically, spiritually speaking, it makes more sense to be a friend of Elohim. But in order to get to Elohim, we need to get away from the world. We are to be in the world, but not of the world. Or do you think that the scripture speaks to no purpose? Does the spirit which dwells in us intensely crave unto envy? Now the scriptures do speak to us. They are the dialogue end of divinity's conversation to humanity, and therein we find the voice of heaven direct us to work and live and flourish on earth. And the spirit which dwells in us, that's a rhetorical question, because if the spirit is envious towards those who have more than we do, or have something we want that we don't, and then that is not the spirit of divinity, but it is a demonic spirit. And he incidentally differentiates between the demonic, worldly, and carnal wisdom in the latter half of the previous chapter we read. But he gives greater grace. Because of this, he says, Elohim resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So the reward for being humble is being exalted. This is a perfect paradox throughout the New Testament. Matthew 23:12, Luke 14:11, and 18:14. He who humbles himself shall be exalted, in the reverse. But he who is pride erects a barrier between himself and the heavenly source, because pride blocks out Elohim. Pride is inherently selfish, and to be selfish creatures is to push Elohim from the center to the periphery of our lives. We are not, even though we are designed by nature to attend to our interest and appetites and accumulate resources thereto, we are ultimately geared or are supposed to be aligned to a higher purpose. And in order to disobey the world or to obey God, we must disobey the world and put ourselves at deliberate remove and resist its culture and temptations and its whole ethos. So then, subject yourselves to Elohim, resist the devil, and he shall flee from you. It's seriously that simple. The victory between good and evil rages on, but we know in advance it is already won, and evil is vanquished and good triumphs. So it makes sense to align ourselves on the side of good, for simply not only because it's victorious, but because it's right. And Elohim, the devils or his minions, the demons, they squirm in the presence of a superior power. So we can crush the adversary who wages war against our flesh and uses the world to tempt the flesh to succumb to sin by drawing near Elohim. Draw near to Elohim, and he shall draw near to you. Cleanse hands, sinners, and cleanse hearts, ye double-minded. Now, to reduce it to a commonly known platitude, take one step towards God, he'll take 2 steps towards you. In other words, he'll meet us more than halfway, because he knows us in our limitations and weaknesses and loves us for them, and he knows that he made us this way so that we could lean on his strength when we are weak. And we need to cleanse our hands and cleanse our hearts, because ultimately the external uncleanliness is less spiritually detrimental than the internal. The heart is every problem. At the heart of every problem is the problem of the heart, to reduce it to a slogan. And a double-minded man is without integrity. A person of integrity will not suffer from the duplicity of the double-minded man. He has a mind invariably oriented towards what is right and good, and is on the straight and narrow path, which excludes the broad way to destruction. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to sadness. So this is to suggest the opposite of the emotional reaction to to cry when we weep, and to weep when we laugh, and the reverse, vice versa, is the principle in mind here. And we can, now the joy in mourning is alluded to in the Beatitudes, I believe Matthew 5:3, it's the opening one, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. So we find comfort in mourning, and our joy can can become sadness when we realize how fleeting and hollow the laughing at the passing, when we lose sight of eternity in mind and take life only at face value for the living for the present. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Master, and he shall lift you up. This is again the paradoxical precept earlier alluded to, humbling yourselves and being exalted for humbling yourselves, versus the implicit double side of the coin, but they focus on that the positive side of that coin. Brothers, do not speak against one another. He that speaks against a brother and judges his brothers speaks against Torah and judges Torah. And if you judge Torah, you are not a doer of the Torah, but a judge. We were never meant to judge our fellow man. All the judgment in the final analysis and the ultimate judgment is solely the prerogative of divinity, and to claim for ourselves the prerogative as exercised in judging other men's is ultimately blasphemous, because we usurp a divine prerogative. We have no right or reason or claim, and to do so is to elevate ourselves above the law to which we are equally subjected to. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge another? This is a common sense argument that in judging others, you will destroy yourselves by the one who has the power to judge and the power to save, because inasmuch as you do this in life or are that, be it loving or merciful or compassionate, so too will you be treated accordingly at the judgment. So we want to bear the future in mind with our present actions, think of them as an investment in eternity. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow, let us go to such and such a city, spend a year there, and trade, and make a profit, when you do not know of tomorrow. For what is your life? For it is a vapor that appears for a little, and then disappears. This is a commentary on the fleeting nature of life. Life is short, to reduce it to a platitude. So how we spend it is really an investment in eternity, and we would do well to spend it wisely with eternity in mind, because life is as fleeting as the grass of the field or any other perishable item of nature. We are biocompatible creatures who will return to the dust in which we are made, but we do have an immortal spirit which can be resurrected into a perfect body in the afterlife, in the presence of divinity in heaven. Instead of your saying, if the Master desires, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your proud speeches. All such boasting is wicked. Boasting is rarely necessary. It is inherently pride-enhancing and ultimately spiritual detrimental, because it is identified here as wickedness, and to a person who has accomplishments that they can rest on or be proud of need not boast of those accomplishments, for they will, if they are truly fulfilling, they will be independent of the need for external aid of boasting in order to get recognition or due or anything along those lines, which are inherently selfish. To him, then, who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Now here is a curious overlap of Christian and Chinese culture, because the distinguished Chinese philosopher known in the West as Confucius said something similar. He said to know and do right but not do it is the worst degree of cowardice, and cowardice is identified as a sin in the Bible. But even more specifically explicit in this text is the indication of sins of commission and omission. A sin of commission is one where we neglect to do something, we fail to take a positive action, and that is as sinful inasmuch as a sin of commission, whereby we deliberately harm someone through offensive word, speech, or action. And really, we limit our conception and our defenses. We limit our defenses when the limit of our conception. So we want to appreciate and approach sin in its broadest possible variety to render the protective barriers which can render us more immune from its snares and from its consequences. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.